"I want a younger wife," my husband yelled, throwing my suitcase onto the porch. He tossed a dirty box of useless papers at my feet and slammed the door on 45 years of marriage. I fell to my knees sobbing, but then I saw what fell out of that box. I picked up the old deed and froze. He thought he was discarding me, but he had just accidentally handed me his entire fortune. Welcome to her Kindle stories. I share new life stories here every day, and I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and gave my video a like. Now, let's jump into the story. I'm sure you'll enjoy it till the end. The smell of rosemary and slow-cooked beef filled the kitchen, the kind of scent that usually promised a warm, comfortable evening. Alice Campbell stood by the oven, wiping her hands on her floral apron. She checked the clock on the wall. It was 6:15 p.m. Scott would be walking through the door any minute now. At 68 years old, Alice moved a little slower than she used to, but her hands were steady, and her pride in this home was as strong as ever. She looked around the kitchen. It was a beautiful space, renovated 5 years ago with cream-colored cabinets and granite countertops that sparkled under the warm recessed lighting. Every tile, every curtain, every picture frame in this house was something she had chosen. This home in Charleston wasn't just a building, it was the tapestry of her life. It was where she had raised 2 children, where she had nursed Scott through the flu more times than she could count, and where she had hosted Thanksgiving dinners for 45 years. She smoothed her hair back. She had been to the salon just yesterday to cover the gray, hoping Scott would notice. He had been distant lately. Not mean, exactly, just absent. He was physically in the room, but his mind was somewhere else. He was 72, a retired businessman who still carried himself with the aggressive energy of a man closing a deal. Lately, that energy had turned restless. He had started buying new shirts, brighter colors that didn't quite suit him. He spent hours on his phone, tilting the screen away whenever Alice walked by. Alice told herself it was just a phase. Men got funny when they stopped working. They needed to feel important again. She turned the heat down on the potatoes. She would make tonight nice. A good dinner, a glass of his favorite red wine, and maybe they could talk about planning a trip to the mountains for the fall. The sound of the garage door opening rumbled through the floorboards. Alice felt that familiar little spark of anticipation she had felt for decades, mixed with a new, subtle knot of anxiety in her stomach. The back door opened. Scott walked in. "Dinner smells good," Alice said, offering a smile. She walked over to give him a peck on the cheek, a ritual as old as their marriage. Scott turned his head. Her lips brushed the air near his ear. He didn't stop to put his keys in the bowl. He didn't take off his jacket. He walked straight past her to the refrigerator, took out a bottle of water, and leaned against the counter, staring at her. The look on his face wasn't tired. It wasn't hungry. It was a look of pure, unfiltered irritation. It was the way a person looks at an old piece of furniture that is taking up too much space. "Is everything okay?" Alice asked, her hands nervously finding the hem of her apron. "I made the roast you like." "I'm not hungry," Scott said. His voice was flat. "Cold." Alice paused. "But you haven't eaten all day. I can wrap it up if you want, but—" "Alice, stop," Scott snapped. The sharpness of his tone made her flinch. "Just stop fussing. I didn't come home to eat roast beef." The silence that followed was heavy. The hum of the refrigerator seemed incredibly loud. Alice stood frozen near the stove. "What's wrong, Scott? Did something happen with the investments? Did the kids call?" Scott laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was a dry, scratching sound. "No, the money is fine. The kids are fine. It's us, Alice. It's this." He waved his hand vaguely in her direction, gesturing at her, at the kitchen, at the life they shared. "I don't understand," Alice whispered. Scott pushed himself off the counter and took a step toward her. He looked taller than usual, looming over her in a way that felt menacing. I'm done, Alice. I've been thinking about this for months. I'm done pretending that this is enough for me. Pretending? Alice felt the blood drain from her face. We've been married 45 years. What are you pretending? That I'm happy, Scott shouted. The sudden volume made Alice jump. I am 72 years old. Alice, I don't have that much time left, and I'll be damned if I spend the rest of my life sitting across the table from you. Alice felt like she had been slapped. She reached out to steady herself on the countertop. Scott, please. You're just tired. Let's sit down. I don't want to sit down. Scott slammed his hand on the granite island. I want a life, Alice. I want excitement. I want to travel. I want to feel alive again. And I can't do that with you. You're old, Alice. You're tired. You just want to bake pies and watch television. I'm not ready to be in a nursing home, even if you are. Tears pricked Alice's eyes. I'm not in a nursing home. I take care of this house. I take care of you. That's the problem. Scott sneered. I don't want a caretaker. I want a wife. A real wife. Someone who looks good. Someone who turns heads when we walk into a restaurant. I want a younger wife. The words hung in the air, ugly and impossible. Alice stared at him, her mouth slightly open. A younger wife? Scott, listen to yourself. You have a family. We have grandchildren. I have a future, Scott corrected her, his voice dropping to a cruel whisper. You are just history. You're the past, Alice. And I'm done with the past. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, heading toward the stairs. Alice followed him, her legs feeling like lead. She couldn't process what was happening. It felt like a nightmare where she couldn't scream. Where are you going? She called after him. To get your things, Scott yelled back from the hallway. Alice stopped at the bottom of the stairs. My things. Scott didn't answer. She heard him stomping around in the master bedroom. She heard the closet door slide, open violently. She heard the sound of hangers clattering and drawers being ripped open. Panic finally pierced through the shock. She ran up the stairs, her breath catching in her throat. When she reached the bedroom door, she gasped. Scott was tossing her clothes into her old blue suitcase. He wasn't folding them. He was grabbing handfuls of her sweaters, her blouses, her underwear, and stuffing them in like they were garbage. Scott, stop it. Alice cried, rushing forward to grab his arm. What are you doing? You can't just pack my bag. He shook her off easily. He was stronger than he looked. I told you, I'm done. I want you out. Tonight. Tonight. Alice screamed. This is my house. We built this life together. You can't just throw me out. Scott zipped the suitcase shut with a vicious yank. He stood up and looked at her with eyes that were completely void of love. That's where you're confused, Alice. This isn't your house. The deed is in my name. The mortgage was paid by my salary. The cars are in my name. The bank accounts, my name. I worked, Alice argued, her voice shaking. I worked part-time for years. I raised the children. I managed everything. So you could build that business. You bought groceries, Scott scoffed. You didn't build an empire. I did, and I'm keeping it. He grabbed the handle of the suitcase and marched past her. Alice had to scramble out of the way to avoid being knocked over. She chased him down the stairs, tears streaming down her face now, blinding her. Scott, please, where am I supposed to go? She begged. It's dark outside. I don't have anywhere to go. Go to Nadine's. Go to a shelter. I don't care, Scott said, not breaking his stride. He reached the front door and threw it open. The evening air rushed in, humid and heavy. Scott dragged the suitcase onto the porch. He didn't set it down gently. He heaved it. The blue bag tumbled down the 3 brick steps and landed on the concrete walkway with a dull thud. He turned back to the entryway table where a cardboard box was sitting. Alice recognized it. It was the junk box from the top of the closet, old tax returns, random receipts, papers they hadn't looked at in decades. "Here," Scott said, shoving the box into her chest. "Take your trash, too. I don't want any of your clutter left in my house." Alice clutched the box, her knuckles turning white. She looked past him into the living room. The warm light, the soft rug, the life she knew. Then she looked at his face. "You're throwing me away," she whispered. "After 45 years. Like I'm nothing." "You aren't nothing, Alice," Scott said, his hand on the doorknob. "You're just expensive. And I'm cutting my costs. My lawyer will call you." "Scott, don't do this," she pleaded, stepping onto the porch. "Please." He didn't hesitate. He didn't look sad. He looked relieved. "Goodbye, Alice," he said. And then he slammed the door. The sound echoed through the quiet neighborhood like a gunshot. The deadbolt clicked into place, a sharp, final metal sound that severed her from her life. Alice stood there on the porch, trembling. The box of papers was heavy in her arms. She looked down at her suitcase, lying sideways on the concrete. Across the street, she saw the curtains twitch in Mrs. Gable's front window. Her neighbor was watching. The humiliation hit Alice harder than the cold. She was 68 years old. She was a respectable woman. She was a grandmother, and she had just been kicked to the curb like an unwanted dog. She looked at the heavy oak door. She waited, hoping he would open it, hoping he would say it was a sick joke. But the house remained silent. The light in the kitchen, where the roast beef was still cooking, clicked off. He had turned off the light. He wasn't coming back. Alice took a shaky breath, the night air filling her lungs with the scent of rain and jasmine. She had no car keys. She had no wallet. She had the clothes on her back, a suitcase of wrinkled sweaters, and a box of old papers. She walked slowly down the steps, her knees aching. She sat on her suitcase on the side of the road, pulling her cardigan tight around her shoulders. She looked at the house one last time, tears blurring the image of the pillars and the perfectly manicured lawn. "I gave you everything," she whispered to the closed door. "Everything." But as she sat there, shivering in the Charleston evening, Alice didn't know that the box resting on her lap wasn't just trash. She didn't know that inside that cardboard prison lay the key to her revenge. She thought her life was over. But really, the war had just begun. The morning sun hit Alice's face through the blinds, but it didn't feel like a fresh start. It felt like an interrogation light. She woke up with a sharp gasp, her heart already hammering against her ribs. For a split second, she expected to smell her own coffee brewing in her own kitchen. She expected to feel the soft, high-thread couch sheets she had bought on sale at Macy's 3 years ago. Instead, she felt the scratchy texture of a throw pillow against her cheek. She smelled the faint scent of cat litter and lavender air freshener. She wasn't in her bed. She was on Nadine's floral sofa, curled up under a knitted afghan, wearing the same wrinkled clothes she had been thrown out in the night before. Reality crashed down on her heavier than the headache throbbing behind her eyes. It wasn't a nightmare. It had actually happened. Nadine, her best friend of 30 years, was already in the kitchen. Alice could hear the kettle whistling. She sat up, her joints stiff and aching. At 68, sleeping on a couch wasn't an adventure. It was a punishment. "Here," Nadine said, walking in with a steaming mug. Her face was grim, lacking its usual morning brightness. "Drink this. It's black. You need the caffeine." Alice took the mug, her hands trembling, so much a little hot liquid sloshed onto her thumb. She didn't even flinch. "I have to go back, Nadine." Nadine sighed. sitting on the coffee table opposite her. Alice, honey, he threw your suitcase on the lawn. He locked the deadbolt. You can't go back there right now. I have to, Alice insisted, her voice raspy. It doesn't make sense. We had a roast in the oven. We were fine. He must be having a breakdown. A medical episode. Maybe a stroke. People change personalities when they have strokes, right? She was grasping at straws, desperate to find a medical reason for the cruelty that had shattered her life. It was easier to believe Scott was sick than to believe he was evil. He didn't look sick to me, Alice, Nadine said gently. He looked mean. But before you go anywhere, we need to look at the practicals. Check the money. The money. Alice set the mug down. She reached for her phone. She opened the banking app she used to pay the utility bills. It was a joint account. They had shared it since 1980. Every paycheck Scott ever earned, every dollar she saved from couponing, it was all in there. She typed in her password. Please wait. The screen flashed red. Invalid login. Alice frowned. Her fingers felt clumsy. I typed it wrong. She did it again. Carefully. SCOTTLICE78. User access suspended. Contact account holder. What does that mean? Alice whispered, turning the phone to Nadine. Access suspended. Nadine looked at the screen, and her face went pale. It means he called the bank. Alice. He locked you out. He changed the passwords. He can't do that, Alice said, panic rising in her throat like bile. My name is on that account. It's our money. If he's the primary account holder. Alice, did you ever have your own account? Just yours. Alice stared at the wall. No. Why would I? We were married. We were partners. The silence in the room was deafening. Partners. The word tasted like ash now. She thought about the credit card in her purse. She opened her wallet and pulled out the blue Visa card. Try to buy something online, Nadine suggested. Just a $5 gift card. Anything. See if it works. Alice opened Amazon. She tried to buy a $10 digital book. Payment declined. She stared at the phone. The notification sat there, mocking her. Declined. She wasn't just homeless. She was destitute. In the span of 12 hours, she had gone from a respected wife in a gated community to a woman with $0 to her name. I'm going over there, Alice said, standing up abruptly. The blanket fell to the floor. Alice, don't, Nadine warned. Call a lawyer first. I can't pay a lawyer. Nadine, my card is declined. Alice snapped, the hysteria finally breaking through. I'm going to my house. I'm going to talk to my husband. This is a mistake. He's just angry. He'll see me and he'll realize what he's doing. Nadine handed her the car keys without another word. She knew there was no stopping her. The drive to her house, no, their house, took 15 minutes. Usually, Alice loved this drive. She loved the way the Spanish moss hung from the oaks and the way the morning light hit the cobblestones downtown before the road smoothed out toward the suburbs. Today, the beauty of Charleston felt offensive. How could the world look so pretty when her life was burning down? She turned into her subdivision. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She rounded the corner onto Elm Street. She slowed the car. There, in the driveway of the house she had decorated, the house she had cleaned, was a car she didn't recognize. It was a bright red convertible, a Mercedes. It looked aggressive and fast and wildly out of place in their conservative driveway. It was parked right behind Scott's sedan, blocking him in. Alice felt a cold numbness spread from her chest to her fingertips. That wasn't a rental. That wasn't a friend's car. She parked Nadine's car on the street and walked up the driveway. Her legs felt heavy, like she was walking through water. She looked at the convertible. There was a pair of oversized sunglasses on the dashboard. Expensive ones. She walked up the brick steps to the front porch. The suitcase was gone. He must have moved it, or maybe the garbage men took it. She reached for the door handle, but she knew it would be locked. It was. She raised her hand and knocked. Bang, bang, bang. "Scott," she called out. "Scott, open the door." No answer. She knocked harder, the wood hurting her knuckles. "Scott, we need to talk. You cut off the bank cards." As her fist hit the wood, a memory flashed through her mind, vivid and sharp. 1978. She was 21. She was standing in a diner kitchen, scraping food off plates. Her feet were swollen, throbbing in cheap shoes. She was working double shifts, waitressing during the day, cleaning at night. Why? Because Scott had gotten into business school. "It's an investment in us, Alice," he had said. "You work now, and I'll take care of us forever." She had come home smelling like grease and stale coffee every night for 2 years, so he wouldn't have to take out loans. Alice hit the door again. "Open the door. I paid for your degree, Scott." Silence from the house. But she saw the curtain in the living room twitch. Someone was watching. Another memory hit her, nearly buckling her knees. 1995. The smell of sickness and bleach. Scott's mother was dying of cancer in their guest room. Scott couldn't handle it. He said he was too sensitive to deal with the mess. So Alice did it. For 6 months, Alice changed the sheets, fed her soup, wiped her face, and held her hand while she screamed in pain. Scott was at the office. "I'm building the business, Alice," he said. "You're better at the nurturing stuff." Alice screamed at the closed door. "I wiped your mother's chin when she was dying because you were too much of a coward to do it. Does she know that? Does the owner of that red car know that?" She was sobbing now, beating on the door with both palms. She didn't care about the neighbors. She didn't care about dignity. She wanted him to acknowledge her existence. 2005. The lawyer's office. A stack of papers a mile high. Scott slid them across the mahogany table. "Just sign here, Han. It's complicated tax stuff for the company. Moving some assets around to protect us." Alice had picked up the pen. She hesitated. "Should I read it?" Scott had laughed, that charming, warm laugh he used to have. "Alice, do you know what a diversified liability holding is? Trust me, I'm the businessman. You're the heart of the home." She had signed. She had signed away rights, transferred titles, agreed to clauses she didn't understand. Because she trusted him. "I trusted you," Alice yelled, her voice cracking. "I signed everything you told me to." The lock clicked. Alice froze. She wiped her face quickly, trying to pull herself together. She expected Scott to look shameful. She expected him to look sad. The door swung open. Scott stood there. He wasn't wearing his pajamas. He was wearing a crisp polo shirt and golf shorts, looking fresh and rested. He held a mug of coffee. In one hand, her favorite mug, the one with the bluebirds on it. He looked at her with a mixture of pity and annoyance, like she was a solicitor trying to sell him something he didn't want. "You're making a scene, Alice," he said calmly. "Mrs. Gable is watching." "Let her watch," Alice said, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Who is in there, Scott? Whose car is that?" Scott took a sip of coffee. "That's none of your concern. You don't live here anymore." "I don't live here?" Alice pointed a shaking finger at the floor. "I picked out this tile. I picked out that rug. I paid for your MBA. I raised your children. And you were compensated," Scott said coldly. "You lived in a nice house. You drove a nice car. You didn't have to work for 40 years. We're even." "Even?" Alice whispered. "You think 45 years of marriage is a transaction? Everything is a transaction, Alice, and the contract is expired." He reached behind the doorframe and pulled out a small cardboard box. It wasn't the papers this time. It rattled. "You left your junk in the bathroom. he said, shoving it into her hands. Alice looked down. It was her prescription blood pressure medication, her reading glasses, and a framed photo of their children when they were toddlers. The glass on the frame was cracked. "You broke it," she said softly. "It fell," Scott shrugged. "Look, Alice, go away." "I mean it." "Or what?" she challenged him, looking up into his eyes. "You'll hit me? You've done everything else." Scott leaned in close. She could smell his cologne. It was a new scent, musk and expensive citrus. "Or I'll call the police," he said softly. "This is my property. You are trespassing. If you aren't off my porch in 2 minutes, I'm calling the sheriff and having you arrested for harassment." Imagine that. Alice Campbell, the church lady, getting hauled off in cuffs. The kids would love that. Alice recoiled, as if he had burned her. The threat was real. She saw it in his eyes. He had erased her. In his mind, she wasn't his wife anymore. She was an intruder. From deep inside the house, a female voice floated out. It was high, light, and young. "Scott, baby, is the coffee ready?" Scott's face changed instantly. The cold mask melted into a smile, but not for Alice. He turned his head, slightly. "Coming, sweetheart." He looked back at Alice one last time. "Go find a hobby, Alice. You're embarrassing yourself." He closed the door. He didn't slam it this time. He just closed it firmly, like closing a book he was bored with. Alice stood on the porch, clutching the box of broken glass and pill bottles. The silence of the morning returned. The birds were singing. The sun was shining on the red convertible. She turned around and walked down the steps. She didn't look at the neighbors. She didn't cry. The tears had stopped. Something inside her had snapped. It wasn't her heart that had broken the night before. This was something else. It was the tether that held her to him. The blind loyalty, the trust, the belief that he was a good man, it was all gone. He had threatened to arrest her. He had replaced her. He had stolen her money. Alice got into Nadine's car and placed the box on the passenger seat. She looked at the cracked photo of her children. "I'm not the one who should be embarrassed, Scott," she said to the empty car. Her voice was low and steady. She put the car in gear. She wasn't going back to Nadine's to cry on the couch. She had work to do. She needed to see what else was in that box of papers he had thrown at her last night. Because if Scott thought she was just history, he was about to learn that history has a nasty way of repeating itself. The drive back to Nadine's house was silent. Alice didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stared out the window at the passing oak trees, feeling like a ghost in her own city. When they walked into Nadine's kitchen, the silence followed them. It sat heavy on the table, right next to Alice's purse and the cardboard box Scott had shoved into her chest. Nadine locked the front door and pulled the blinds shut, a protective gesture that made Alice's throat tighten. "Sit down," Nadine said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "I'm getting a laptop." Alice sat. She looked at her hands. They were shaking again. These were hands that had changed diapers, planted hydrangeas, and polished silver for 45 years. Now, they lay useless on a stranger's tablecloth. Nadine returned with her reading glasses perched on her nose and her laptop open. "Okay," she said, cracking her knuckles. "We need to know the damage. You said the app was locked. Let's try the actual website. Maybe we can reset the password via email." He changed the email. Alice whispered, "I got a notification on my phone this morning. I didn't understand what it meant at the time. It said, 'Recovery email updated.'" Nadine cursed under her breath. "Okay, we call them. Speakerphone." Alice dialed the number on the back of her declined debit card. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the automated voice asked for her account number. She typed it in. "Please hold for a representative." The hold music was a cheerful, upbeat jazz tune that felt like a mockery. Alice sat there for 20 minutes listening to the saxophone while her entire life hung in the balance. Finally, a woman's voice clicked on. "Thank you for calling Charleston Fidelity. This is Sarah. How can I help you?" "Hello, Sarah," Alice said, her voice trembling. "My name is Alice Campbell. I'm trying to access my checking account, but my card was declined, and I can't log in online." "One moment, Mrs. Campbell. Let me pull up the file." There was the sound of typing, then a pause. A long, uncomfortable pause. "Mrs. Campbell, I see here that the primary account holder, Mr. Scott Campbell, visited the branch this morning at 9 a.m. "Yes, that's my husband," Alice said. "But it's a joint account." "It was a joint account," the teller said, her voice dropping to a sympathetic but professional tone. "Mr. Campbell removed you from the access list and transferred the funds to a new, private holding. Because the primary structure of the account was under his Social Security number initially, he has the right to secure the funds if he claims a security breach." "A security breach?" Alice nearly dropped the phone. "I'm his wife. I'm not a hacker." "I understand, ma'am. But the notes here say, they say pending separation, spousal instability. He flagged the account for fraud prevention." "Fraud?" Alice gasped. "He's the one stealing the money." "I can't make a judgment on that, ma'am. I can only tell you that your name is no longer on the active ledger. You have zero access. You'll need to speak with him or his legal counsel to resolve this." "But I have no money," Alice said, the tears finally spilling over. "I have nothing. How am I supposed to buy food? How am I supposed to put gas in the car?" "I'm very sorry, Mrs. Campbell. Is there anything else I can help you with today?" Nadine reached over and tapped the end call button. The room went quiet again. Alice put her face in her hands. The shame hit her harder than the poverty. It was a specific kind of shame that only women of her generation understood. She had done what she was supposed to do. She had been the good wife. She had trusted him to handle the business side of things because he was the man, and that's just how it worked. She had let him handle the mortgage, the investments, the savings. She had never asked questions because she thought asking questions meant she didn't trust him. And now, that trust had made her a beggar. "I'm a fool," Alice sobbed into her palms. "I'm a stupid, old fool. He planned this, Nadine. He went to the bank at 9 a.m. While I was sleeping on your couch, he was standing in line to cut me off. He didn't just plan it," Nadine said, her voice hard. "He executed it. He's been moving pieces around for months, Alice. You said he was distant. He wasn't distant. He was busy." Alice looked up, her eyes red. "What am I going to do? I'm 68. Who is going to hire me? I haven't had a job since 1978. I don't know how to use the new computers. I don't have a resume. I'm invisible." She felt it deep in her bones. The invisibility. When you are a wife, you are someone. You are Mrs. Scott Campbell. You are the hostess. You are the mother. But without him, without the house, who is she? Just an old woman in wrinkled clothes sitting in someone else's kitchen. "Stop it," Nadine said sharply. Alice blinked. "What?" "Stop feeling sorry for yourself," Nadine said. She stood up and walked over to the counter. She grabbed the cardboard box, the one Scott had thrown at Alice the night before. She slammed it onto the kitchen table. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light. "Deed of title." Alice stared at the words. "A deed? For what?" Nadine asked, leaning over the table, her breath smelling of coffee. "Is it the house?" "No," Alice said, shaking her head. "The house is in Scott's name. He made sure of that." She opened the blue cover. Her eyes scanned the legal jargon, the whereas and the here and afters. She looked for the property description, that certain piece, parcel or tract of land situate, lying and being in the outer district of Charleston County, containing 20 acres, more or less, known as the Miller Marshlands. The Miller Marshlands, Alice said, a memory surfacing. That was my daddy's hunting land. It was just mud and mosquitoes. Daddy used to take the dogs out there. Who is the owner? Nadine asked, tapping the paper. Look at the grantee line. Who owns it? Alice moved her finger down the page. She passed Scott's name as the executor. She passed the date, October 14th, 1985. And then she stopped. There, typed clearly in black ink, was the name of the grantee, Alice Miller Campbell. Alice blinked. She looked at Nadine. Then she looked back at the paper. It says me, Alice whispered. It says me. Why do you have it? Nadine asked. Did you buy it? No, Alice said, her mind racing. Scott told me about this land. He said it was worthless. He said it wasn't worth the filing fees to transfer it to his company. He called it your daddy's mud pit. He laughed about it. He laughed about it, Nadine repeated slowly. So he didn't put it in the trust. He didn't put it in the LLC. He didn't want it. Alice said. He left it in my name because he was too cheap to pay the transfer tax on something he thought was garbage. Nadine grabbed the deed. She stood up and walked to the window, holding it up to the light to check the watermark. Alice, she said, turning back with a look in her eyes that Alice had never seen before. It was a look of predatory excitement. What? Alice asked. It's just a swamp, Nadine. It's probably underwater. Maybe, Nadine said. Or maybe not. Charleston has grown a lot since 1985. The outer district isn't so outer anymore. Alice felt a strange sensation in her chest. It wasn't hope exactly. It was adrenaline. For the first time in 24 hours, she wasn't thinking about how Scott had hurt her. She was thinking about what Scott had missed. Do you think it's worth anything? Alice asked. I don't know, Nadine said, slapping the deed back onto the table. But we're going to find out. Grab your purse, Alice. We are going to see a lawyer. And this time, we have something to trade. Alice looked at the box of trash. She looked at the gold cufflink. And she looked at the deed. Scott had thrown her out with nothing but the clothes on her back. And this box. He thought he was burying her. But as Alice touched the cool paper of the deed, she realized something. Scott Campbell was a businessman. He looked at the bottom line. He looked at the profit. But he had made the classic mistake of the arrogant man. He had underestimated the value of what he already owned. Alice stood up. She wiped the tears from her cheeks. She didn't know what the Miller Marshlands were worth. Maybe it was just mud. But it was her mud. And for the first time since he slammed the door, Alice Campbell felt a flicker of a fight coming back to life. Alice sat at Nadine's kitchen table, staring at the blue document as if it were a live snake. The adrenaline from finding it had faded slightly, replaced by a heavy, nagging doubt. She ran her thumb over the raised gold seal. It felt official, but in her head, she could still hear Scott's voice. It's trash, Alice, just like your daddy's old truck. It's probably nothing, Alice said, her voice small. She pushed the deed toward the center of the table. Scott is a businessman, Nadine. He doesn't make mistakes with money. If this land was worth a dime, he would have sold it or put it in his name 30 years ago. Nadine didn't answer immediately. She was busy clearing the breakfast dishes to make room for her laptop. She opened the screen and cracked her knuckles. Scott is a businessman, sure, but he's also a narcissist. And narcissists think they know everything. That's usually when they miss the details. Nadine typed into the search bar. Okay, read me the parcel number. It should be at the top left. Alice squinted at the faded typewriter ink. Parcel ID for -4-0-9. A district of West Ashley, outer perimeter. West Ashley outer perimeter, Nadine muttered, typing furiously. Okay, pulling up the county GIS map. That stands for Geographic Information System. My grandson showed me how to use it when I was fighting the city about that drainage ditch last year. Alice watched the screen. A map of Charleston appeared, covered in little colored squares. It looked like a quilt made of satellite photos. Okay, zooming out, Nadine said, 1985. That area would have been the middle of nowhere. Just marsh grass and alligators. That's what Scott said, Alice recalled. He called it mosquito heaven. He said my father was a fool for buying it. A memory washed over Alice, sharp and clear. She was back in the lawyer's office in 1985, right after her father's funeral. She was wearing a black dress that was too tight. Scott was sitting next to her, checking his watch every 2 minutes. The lawyer, Mr. Henderson, had pushed this very deed across the desk. Now, Scott, this is the remaining acreage. It's classified as wetlands. Not much you can do with it right now, but land is land. Scott had laughed. He didn't even touch the paper. He just waved his hand dismissively. Henderson, I'm not paying the transfer tax on 20 acres of mud. It's a liability. If someone trips and falls out there, I get sued. Leave it in Alice's name. We'll let it sit. Maybe the state will buy it for conservation one day, and we can take a tax write-off. Until then, just file it away. File it away. He left it, Alice whispered, coming back to the present. He left it because he didn't want to pay the transfer tax. He thought it was a liability. Well, let's see if it's still a liability, Nadine said. Her finger hovered over the mouse. Found it. Parcel 4-4-0-9. Hey, she clicked. The map zoomed in. Alice leaned forward, her breath catching in her throat. She expected to see green, swamp water. She expected to see nothing. Instead, she saw gray. Lots of gray. And white lines. What is that? Alice asked, pointing at the screen. That, Nadine said, her voice trembling slightly, is the new interchange for Interstate 526. Alice blinked. The highway. Alice. Nadine turned to her, eyes wide. Look where the land is. It's not in the swamp anymore. They drained this section 5 years ago when they expanded the Beltway. Look at what is right next to it. Nadine dragged the map to the right. A massive, sprawling complex of white buildings with blue roofs appeared on the screen. Is that the Boeing plant? Alice asked. It's the logistics center. Nadine corrected her. And look here. This gray square right next to your property line? That's the new cloud computing data center. They just broke ground on last month. Amazon or Google, I forget which one. Alice felt dizzy. I don't understand. What does that mean for the mud? It means it's not mud, Alice. Nadine practically shouted. It's commercial frontage. It's 20 acres of undeveloped land sitting directly between a major interstate highway and a billion-dollar tech corridor. Alice shook her head, trying to process the words. But wouldn't Scott know? He reads the financial papers every day. He reads about his investments. Nadine said, he thinks this land is dead. He wrote it off 40 years ago. He probably hasn't looked at a survey map of West Ashley since the 80s. He thinks it's still underwater. Nadine opened another tab. Zillow. Let's just see what land is going for in that zip code. Just for a laugh. She typed in the area code. A list of properties popped up. 0.5 acres, commercial zone, $450,000. 2 acres, industrial zone, $1.2 million. Alice read the numbers. Her stomach did a flip. Nadine, I have 20 acres. Nadine pulled out a calculator from her junk drawer. She punched in some numbers. She stared at the result. Then she showed it to Alice. If we sell it at the lowest comparable rate, Nadine said, her voice deadly serious. Just for the raw land value. Alice, this is worth somewhere between $4 and $6 million. The room went silent. The refrigerator hummed. A car drove by outside. Alice looked at her hands. They were the same hands that had scrubbed Scott's floors yesterday. They were the same hands that had packed a suitcase in terror last night. $6 million, Alice whispered. It was a number she couldn't even visualize. It was monopoly money. But wait, Alice said, the panic returning. Scott, he'll take it. He'll say it's marital property. He'll say he paid the taxes on it, so it's his. Did he pay the taxes? Nadine asked. Think, Alice. You handled the mail. Alice closed her eyes, thinking back. The mail. The bills. The tax bill for the land. It came once a year. It was small, $80 or something, because it was classified as wasteland. It came addressed to me, Alice Miller. I used to write the check from the household account, but I signed it. And the deed. Nadine tapped the blue paper. Read the name again. Alice looked down. Alice Miller Campbell as her sole and separate property. It says sole and separate, Nadine noted. In South Carolina, inheritance is considered separate property unless you commingle it, unless you put his name on the deed, or use the money for the family. I never used it, Alice said. It just sat there. He wouldn't let me touch it. He said it was worthless. His arrogance saved you, Nadine said, a slow grin spreading across her face. He was so convinced it was trash that he never tried to steal it. If he had known it was worth millions, he would have bullied you into signing it over to his LLC years ago. But he didn't. Alice stood up. She walked to the window and looked out at Nadine's garden. She felt a strange sensation in her chest. It was the feeling of a heavy weight being lifted, replaced by a terrifying power. For 45 years, Scott had controlled the money. He had controlled the house. He had controlled the narrative. He had convinced her that she was helpless without him. He had thrown her away because he thought she had no value. But all this time, while she was cooking his meals and washing his clothes, she had been sitting on a gold mine. He doesn't know, Alice said softly. No, Nadine said behind her. He doesn't. He thinks I'm destitute, Alice continued, turning around. He thinks I'm begging for scraps. He thinks I'm going to come crawling back to ask for alimony. And we are going to let him think that, Nadine said. We aren't going to list this land yet. If we list it, he sees it. If he sees it, he fights you for it. So what do we do? Alice asked. We confirm it, Nadine said. We go to the zoning office downtown. We get an official stamp that says this land is commercial. And then we get a lawyer. Alice looked at the box of trash on the table, the crayons, the old receipts, the broken picture frame. Scott had thrown it at her to hurt her. He had wanted to bruise her. Instead, he had given her the weapon that would end him. He told me I was history. Alice said, her voice hardening. She picked up the deed and folded it carefully, sliding it into her purse next to her declined debit card. He was right, Nadine. I am history. I'm the history he forgot to erase. Let's go, Nadine said, grabbing her keys. We have a zoning map to check. Alice walked out the door. She didn't look like a victim anymore. She looked like a woman who had just found the combination to the safe. Scott Campbell wanted a younger wife. Fine. He could have one, but he was going to have to pay for her with the money Alice was about to take back. The waiting room of David Parker's law office smelled of lemon polish and old books. It was a stark contrast to the sleek glass and steel firm Scott used for his business. This office, located in a converted Victorian house on Broad Street, felt quieter, heavier. Alice sat on a leather sofa that had seen better days, clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. Stop fidgeting, Nadine whispered, patting Alice's knee. David is good. He handled my cousin's probate case when her brother tried to steal the farm. He doesn't like bullies. I don't have a retainer. Nadine, Alice hissed back, her voice trembling. Lawyers cost hundreds of dollars an hour. I have the $50 from the cufflink we pawned and a declined debit card. Let me handle the money, Nadine said firmly. You just handle the truth. The heavy oak door opened, and a man stepped out. David Parker was in his late 50s, with silver hair and a face that looked like he had heard every lie ever told and wasn't impressed by any of them. He wasn't wearing a suit jacket, just a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Mrs. Campbell, he asked, looking over his reading glasses. Nadine said it was an emergency. Alice stood up. Her legs felt wobbly. It is Mr. Parker. My husband. He threw me out last night. David's expression softened just a fraction. He ushered them into his office, a room lined with shelves of legal encyclopedias. He pointed to a chair. Sit. Tell me what happened. And don't leave out the ugly parts. Alice told him. She told him about the roast beef, the younger woman, the humiliation on the porch. She told him about the bank accounts being locked and the threat of arrest. It was hard to say the words out loud. Saying them made them real. It turned her marriage into a crime scene. David took notes on a yellow legal pad, his pen scratching rhythmically. When she finished, he sat back and sighed. It's a classic gray divorce aggressive tactic, David said, his voice calm but stern. He locks the assets to starve you out. He wants you desperate, so you'll sign a quick settlement just to get rent money. He's banking on you being too scared to fight. I am scared, Alice admitted. He has millions, Mr. Parker. He has a team of lawyers. I have a box of old papers. About those papers, Nadine interrupted, leaning forward. Show him Alice. Alice reached into her purse and pulled out the blue document. She placed the deed on the mahogany desk. David picked it up. He adjusted his glasses. He read the cover. He flipped to the legal description. Then he stopped. He looked up at Alice, then back at the paper. Mrs. Campbell, David said slowly, "Do you know what this is?" "It's my father's old hunting land," Alice said. "Scott says it's worthless swamp." "It was swamp in 1985, David said. He turned to his computer and typed in the parcel number, just as Nadine had done. He stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he let out a low whistle. "This isn't swamp anymore," David said. "This is adjacent to the new tech corridor. I have a client who sold a 3-acre lot near here last month for a distribution center. Mrs. Campbell, this land isn't worthless. Conservatively, it's a gold mine." Alice felt the air leave the room. "So I'm rich." "Technically, yes," David said, "but legally, it's complicated." The hope that had just flared in Alice's chest flickered. "What do you mean?" "The deed has my name on it. It says sole and separate property." David took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Here's the problem. You've been married 45 years. South Carolina is an equitable distribution state. Even if this was an inheritance, Scott can argue that he paid the property taxes from a joint account. He can argue that the appreciation in value happened during the marriage. He can claim that he managed the asset, even by deciding not to sell it. He called it trash. Alice cried. He wanted nothing to do with it. "It doesn't matter what he said in the kitchen," David explained patiently. "It matters what his lawyers will say in court. If Scott finds out this land is worth $5 million, he will sue you. He will claim it's a marital asset. He will tie this up in litigation for 3 years. He will drain the value of the land in legal fees until there is nothing left but dirt." Alice slumped in her chair. "So I can't win. He has the money to wait me out. I don't." "I didn't say you can't win," David said, a sharp glint appearing in his eyes. "I said you can't fight him head on. If you walk into court today and shout, "I have $5 million in land," he will come after it like a shark. We need him to believe it's worthless. He already thinks it's worthless, Alice said. Good, David said. We need to keep it that way long enough to get his signature. David stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street. Here is the strategy. We are not going to sue him for the land. We are going to let him give it to you. Give it to me? Alice asked. He won't give me anything. He threw my clothes on the lawn. Exactly. David turned back, a small, dangerous smile on his face. Scott is arrogant. You told me that. He thinks he's the smartest man in the room. He thinks you are helpless. We are going to use that. David sat down and started drawing a diagram on his notepad. We are going to approach him with a settlement offer, David explained. We will ask for something he values: cash, alimony, a share of his business. We will demand a lot. We will make a huge fuss about wanting half of his company. He'll never agree to that, Alice said. His business is his baby. Right, David nodded. He will refuse. He will get angry. And then, when he is angry and desperate to get rid of you, we will offer a compromise. We will say, fine, Scott, keep your business. Keep the house. Keep the cash. Just give Alice the old family land, so she has somewhere to park a trailer. We will act like you are defeated. Alice stared at him. You want me to beg? I want you to act, David corrected her. If he thinks the land is trash, and he thinks giving it to you will save him from paying you alimony or splitting his business, he will sign it over in a heartbeat. He will think he is ripping you off. He will think he won. And once he signs? Nadine asked. Once he signs a quitclaim deed, releasing all marital interest in the property, David said, tapping the desk. It's over. It becomes 100% yours, legally severed from the marriage. Then, when we sell it a month later for millions, there is nothing he can do. He signed it away. Alice sat quietly, processing the plan. It was a trap. It was deceptive. It was exactly the kind of deal Scott would have made. But I have to see him, Alice said quietly. I have to look him in the eye and pretend I'm weak. Can you do that? David asked. Can you let him insult you one last time? Can you let him think he's the winner? Alice thought about the younger woman's car in the driveway. She thought about the locked bank account. She thought about the way he had looked at her, like she was an expired product he was tossing in the bin. She realized she didn't feel like crying anymore. The sadness was hardening into something cold and heavy, like iron. I did it for 45 years, Alice said, her voice steady. I let him think he was the smart one. I let him think he was the only one who mattered. I can do it for 1 more hour. David nodded. Good. I'll draft the papers. We'll set up a meeting for tomorrow. I'll take the case on contingency. Alice, you don't pay me a dime until we sell that land. Alice stood up. She felt different, taller, maybe. One more thing, David warned. You cannot tell anyone. Not your children. Not your neighbors. If Scott gets even a whisper that the zoning has changed, the deal is off. He has to believe you are destitute. My children aren't calling me anyway, Alice said, a trace of bitterness in her voice. And my neighbors watched me get thrown out. I have no one to tell but Nadine. Then we are ready, David said, extending his hand. Alice shook it. His grip was firm. Go get some rest, Mrs. Campbell. David said, tomorrow you have to give the performance of your life. Walking out of the office, the Charleston sun felt brighter. Alice put her sunglasses on. You okay? Nadine asked as they walked to the car. I'm terrified, Alice admitted, but I'm not confused anymore. What do you mean? I spent all night wondering why I wasn't enough, Alice said, opening the car door. Wondering why he stopped loving me. But now I realize it doesn't matter. He thinks I'm a burden. Tomorrow, I'm going to show him that the burden he's so eager to drop is actually the golden goose. She got into the passenger seat and looked at the side mirror. She fixed her hair. She didn't have money for a salon, and she didn't have money for a new dress. She would have to wear the same clothes she had on. Perfect, Alice thought. Let him see the wrinkles. Let him see the same outfit. Let him see the old wife he despises. It was the perfect costume for the heist she was about to pull. Let's go home, Nadine, Alice said. I need to practice my begging voice. Nadine started the engine, a wicked grin on her face. Oh, this is going to be fun. Alice looked out the window as they merged into traffic. She wasn't just a wife anymore. She was a strategist, and Scott Campbell, the brilliant businessman, was about to make the worst deal of his life. The house looked exactly the same from the street, but walking up the driveway felt like walking onto a movie set after the cameras had stopped rolling. The red convertible was still there, parked carelessly at an angle that blocked the garage. Alice clutched her purse against her chest. Inside, tucked between a pack of tissues and her reading glasses, was the plan. She wasn't wearing makeup. She had chosen her oldest beige cardigan, the one with the slight pill on the sleeve. She wanted to look tired. She wanted to look beaten. Honestly, it didn't take much acting. She was tired, but today, that exhaustion was a weapon. David Parker, her lawyer, met her at the front door. He looked calm, holding his briefcase like a shield. "Remember," David whispered, leaning in close before ringing the bell. "You are desperate. You are scared. You just want this over with." "I'm ready," Alice said. Her voice was steady, even if her hands weren't. The door opened. It wasn't Scott. It was a young woman. She couldn't have been more than 35. She was wearing yoga pants and a tight tank top, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun that looked effortlessly chic. She held a green juice in one hand. She looked at Alice, then at David, and her expression shifted from confusion to awkward realization. "Oh," she said, "you're the wife." "I'm Alice," Alice said, staring at the woman standing in her entryway, the woman who was drinking from one of Alice's crystal glasses. "Scott is in the study," the woman said, stepping back to let them in. She didn't apologize. She didn't introduce herself. She just turned and walked toward the kitchen, her flip-flops slapping against the hardwood floor. Alice felt a flash of hot rage, but she swallowed it down. Focus, she told herself. Eyes on the prize. They walked down the hallway to the study. Scott was sitting behind his large mahogany desk, the leather chair squeaking as he leaned back. He didn't stand up when Alice entered. He looked annoyed, like he was dealing with a vendor who had messed up an order. Next to him sat his lawyer, a man named Mr. Vance, who wore a suit that cost more than Alice's first car. "Let's make this quick," Scott said, checking his watch. "I have a tea time at 2. Alice sat in the chair opposite him. It was lower than his, designed to make whoever sat there feel small. She slumped her shoulders forward, shrinking into herself. "Hello, Scott," she said softly. "Alice," he nodded curtly. "Mr. Vance has the papers drawn up. It's a standard separation agreement. Very generous, considering." Mr. Vance slid a thick stack of documents across the desk. "Mr. Campbell is offering a one-time cash settlement of $25,000, Vance said in a smooth, practiced voice. "In exchange, you waive all claims to the business, the marital home, and any future alimony. You keep your personal vehicle and personal effects." David picked up the paper. He didn't look at it. He looked at Scott. "25,000? Scott, you and Alice have been married for 45 years. The business is worth millions. The house is worth $2 million. This is an insult." Scott slammed his hand on the desk. "The business is mine. I built it." She sat at home. "The house is in my name. I paid the mortgage. She has no legal claim to anything." She raised your children, David countered calmly. She managed the household. A judge would award her 50%. A judge will take 3 years to decide that. Scott shouted, his face turning red. Does she have 3 years? David, look at her. She's homeless. She's sleeping on a couch. If she wants to drag this out, I will bury her in legal fees. She won't see a dime until she's 75. Alice let out a small, pathetic sound. She reached for a tissue and dabbed at her dry eyes. Scott, please, she whispered, her voice trembling. I can't fight you. I don't have the money. Scott's expression softened into a sneer. He sat back, crossing his arms. See? She knows it. She's smart enough to know when she's beaten. Take the 25 grand. Alice, get yourself a little apartment. Move on. Alice looked at the check sitting on the desk. She looked up at Scott, making sure her eyes were wide and fearful. 25,000 won't last long, Scott, she said. Rents are so high now. I don't know where I'm going to go. Nadine can't keep me forever. That's not my problem, Scott said cold-heartedly. I know, Alice sniffled. She took a deep breath, preparing to deliver the line they had rehearsed. I don't want your business, Scott. I don't understand it anyway, and I don't want the house. It's too big for me now. Good, Scott said. So sign. But I need a place to live, Alice pleaded. I was thinking maybe I could buy a used trailer. Something small. Scott laughed, a bark of genuine amusement. A trailer? Alice Campbell in a trailer park? Jesus, have some dignity. I'm trying to... Alice cried out, injecting a note of hysteria into her voice. But I have nowhere to put it. The lot fees are expensive. She paused. She looked down at her hands. Scott, what about the Miller land? The room went quiet. Scott frowned, trying to place the name. The what? Daddy's hunting land, Alice said. The swamp out in West Ashley. You know, the mud pit. Scott rolled his eyes. Oh, that. It's just sitting there, Alice said, rushing her words like she was begging for a favor. I know it's worthless. I know it's just mosquitoes and dirt. But if I had that land, I could put a trailer on it. I wouldn't have to pay rent. It's the only thing my daddy left me. She looked up at him, eyes pleading. Please, Scott, just let me have the swamp. You can keep the business. You can keep the house. You can keep the millions. Just give me the dirt, so I have somewhere to die. Scott looked at Mr. Vance. Do we own that? Vance opened a file folder. He flipped through a few pages. It's listed as a non-performing asset, separate property of Mrs. Campbell, but technically commingled due to tax payments. Assessed value in 1990 was $500. It's categorized as wetlands. Unbuildable. Unbuildable, Scott repeated, turning back to Alice with a smirk. You want to live in a swamp, Alice? You want to sink into the mud. It's all I have, Alice whispered. Scott looked at her. He saw an old woman in a beige sweater who was desperate for a patch of dirt to park a trailer on. He saw a problem that was solving itself. If he gave her the trash land, he looked generous, and he didn't have to give her any real assets. Tell you what, Scott said, leaning forward with a benevolent, arrogant smile. I'm feeling generous. I'll give you the 25,000 and the swamp. But you sign the waiver right now. Full release. You never come after my company again. David hesitated. He played his part perfectly. Alice, I don't know. A piece of swamp isn't a fair trade for a business worth. I don't care, David. Alice interrupted him, grabbing his arm. I just want it over. I want the land. It's mine anyway. Scott chuckled. He pulled a pen from his pocket, a gold Montblanc pen Alice had bought him for their 30th anniversary. Listen to your client, David. She knows what she wants. Vance, write it up. Mr. Vance typed quickly on his laptop and printed a new page from the wireless printer in the corner. He slid it across the desk. Quitclaim deed and release of interest. I, Scott Campbell, hereby waive, release, and quitclaim any and all marital interest, right, or title to the property known as the Miller Marshlands, regarding said property as the sole and separate asset of Alice Miller Campbell. Scott didn't even read it fully. He just wanted her out of his office. He scrawled his signature at the bottom with a flourish. There, Scott said, tossing the pen down. It's yours. Enjoy the mosquitoes, Alice. Don't come crying to me when your trailer sinks. Alice reached for the paper. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it would burst through her chest. She picked up the pen. She signed her name below his, Alice Miller Campbell. It was done. David immediately reached out and took the document. He placed it inside his briefcase and clicked the locks shut. Snap! Snap! The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Alice sat there for a moment. She looked at the check for $25,000. She picked it up and folded it neatly into her purse. Then she stood up. She didn't stand up like an old woman with bad knees. She stood up straight. She rolled her shoulders back. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the air of the house she had built, knowing she would never step foot in it again, and realizing she didn't care. "Thank you, Scott," Alice said. Her voice was different. The waver was gone. The wine was gone. It was clear, strong, and cold. Scott looked up, confused by the sudden change in tone. "Yeah, well, good luck." Alice didn't turn to leave. She stood there, looking down at him. She looked at his thinning hair. She looked at the arrogance in his jaw. She looked at the man she had devoted her life to, the man who had just traded $5 million for a quick signature because he was too lazy to check a map. A smile spread across Alice's face. It wasn't a nice smile. It was sharp. It was the smile of a woman who had just held the winning lottery ticket, while the clerk told her she was broke. "What?" Scott asked, frowning. "Why are you looking at me like that?" "I was just thinking," Alice said, her voice smooth as glass. "You always told me I was bad with money, that I didn't understand investments." "You don't," Scott scoffed. "That's why you're going to live in a swamp." "Maybe," Alice said. She patted her purse where the signed deed lay safe and sound. "But I think I just made the best deal of my life. Goodbye, Scott. I hope she's worth it." She turned on her heel and walked out. She walked past Mr. Vance, who was staring at her with a sudden look of unease. She walked down the hallway, past the younger woman, who was now scrolling on her phone in the kitchen. "Nice meeting you," Alice called out cheerfully to the mistress. "Make sure you check the prenup." She walked out the front door and into the sunshine. David was right behind her. As soon as the heavy door clicked shut, David let out a long, shaky breath. "You were terrifying," David said, grinning. "I almost believed you wanted that trailer." Alice walked to Nadine's car, where her friend was waiting with the engine running. She opened the door and slid in. She pulled the document out of her purse and kissed the signature. "He signed it?" Nadine asked, eyes wide. "He signed it," Alice said. "He laughed while he did it. He thinks he gave me a pile of dirt. He's going to have a heart attack when he sees the for sale sign." Nadine laughed. Alice looked back at the house one last time. The red convertible gleamed in the driveway. Scott thought he had won. He thought he had discarded her. "Drive," Alice said. "We have to get this recorded at the courthouse before he figures out he just gave away his retirement fund." As the car pulled away, Alice didn't feel discarded anymore. She felt dangerous. The trap was snapped. Now, all she had to do was wait for the beast to realize he was caught. 3 days later, the headline hit the Charleston Post and Courier. It was tucked into the business section, but to Scott Campbell, it must have looked like a billboard on the highway. "Tech giant secures West Ashley corridor. Miller Marshland sold for $5.2 million. Alice sat at Nadine's kitchen table, reading the words over and over again. $5.2 million. The mud pit Scott had laughed at, the trash he had thrown at her to make her go away, was now one of the most valuable parcels of land in the county. She carefully cut out the article with Nadine's kitchen shears. The piece didn't last long. Her phone rang at 10 a.m. It was David Parker. He saw it. David said, his voice tight. Scott just filed an emergency injunction. He's suing you for fraud, malicious deceit, and breach of contract. He claims you knew the value of the land and intentionally misled him to secure the asset. I didn't mislead him, Alice said, feeling a spike of anxiety. I asked for a trailer park. He's the one who called it a swamp. I know that, and you know that, David reassured her. The waiver he signed is ironclad. He explicitly released any and all claims regardless of future valuation. We will win, Alice, but he's going to make it ugly. He's going to try to drag your name through the mud before we get to a judge. Let him try, Alice said. She felt stronger now. She had 5 million reasons to be strong. But Scott Campbell didn't just fight with lawyers. He fought with guilt. 2 hours later, a car pulled into Nadine's driveway. Then another. Alice looked out the window and felt her stomach drop. It wasn't a process server. It was a silver Lexus SUV and a black BMW. It was her children, Jason, 42, and Kara, 39. Alice hadn't seen them since the night Scott threw her out. She had texted them, telling them she was safe at Nadine's. Jason had replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Kara hadn't replied at all. They worked for Scott's company. Jason was the VP of operations. Kara ran marketing. Their salaries, their mortgages, their children's private school tuition. It all came from Scott. Alice opened the door before they could knock. Mom, Jason said. He looked tired. He was wearing his work suit. His tie loosened. He looked so much like Scott that Alice had to blink to clear the image. Hi, Mom, Kara said. She was holding a designer purse in front of her, like a shield, looking around Nadine's modest porch with distinct discomfort. You found me? Alice said. She didn't step aside to let them in. She stood in the doorway. You didn't answer my calls last week. We've been busy, Mom, Jason said, scrubbing his face with his hand. Dad he's been impossible. The office is a war zone. Look, can we sit down? We need to talk. Alice hesitated. Every instinct in her body screamed to let them in, to make them tea, to fix whatever was wrong. That was what she had done for 40 years. She was the peacemaker. She was the buffer between Scott's temper and the children's feelings. We can sit on the porch, Alice said. She didn't want them inside. She didn't want their energy in her sanctuary. They sat on Nadine's wicker chairs. The humidity was rising, making the air thick and sticky. So, Alice said, folding her hands in her lap, to what do I owe the pleasure? Did you bring my grandkids? The kids are at school, Kara said quickly. Mom, we need to talk about this lawsuit. There's nothing to talk about, Alice said. Your father threw me out. I made a deal. He signed it. He didn't know it was worth $5 million. Jason exploded. Mom, come on. You tricked him. I tricked him? Alice asked, her voice rising. He told me it was trash. He told me to put a trailer on it. He humiliated me, Jason. He kicked me out of my own house for a woman half my age. Did you say anything to him about that? Did you tell him he was wrong? Jason looked away. That's between you and Dad. It's complicated. It's not complicated, Alice said. He cheated. He was cruel. And now he's facing the consequences. Mom, listen, Kara leaned forward, putting on her marketing voice. We know Dad was a jerk. Okay? We get it. But this lawsuit, it's going to be public. If it gets out that the Campbell family is suing each other over fraud, it destroys the brand. Investors get nervous. If the stock drops, Mom, that's our inheritance. That's the kids' college funds. Alice stared at her daughter. You're worried about the brand? We're worried about the family. Kara insisted. Dad is talking about freezing everything. He's going to spend every dime. He is fighting you just out of spite. He'll bankrupt the company before he lets you keep that $5 million. He can't bankrupt the company, Kara, Alice said. He has a board of directors. He's Dad, Jason said grimly. He'll burn it down. Mom, look, we talked to him. We got him to agree to a new deal. Alice raised an eyebrow. A new deal? Yes, Jason reached into his jacket pocket. He didn't pull out a tissue for his mother's tears. He pulled out a folded legal document. If you agree to void the land transfer and give the deed back, Dad will give you a cash settlement. $500,000. Cash. Tax-free. $500,000. Alice repeated. The land is sold for $5 million, but the lawyers will take half of that. Kara argued, and it will take years. Mom, take the $500,000. It's enough for a nice condo. You can retire. You can be calm. We can all go back to being a family. Go back to being a family, Alice echoed. She looked at her son. She looked at her daughter. Where were you? Alice asked softly. What? Jason frowned. Last Tuesday, Alice said, when I was standing on the curb with my clothes in a garbage bag. Where were you? I called you, Jason. I left a voicemail. I said, Dad threw me out. You sent me a thumbs up emoji. Jason flushed red. I was in a meeting with the suppliers. I didn't know it was that bad. You knew? Alice said. You both knew he was seeing that girl. You've known for months, haven't you? The silence on the porch was heavy. Kara looked at her shoes. Jason looked at the street. You knew, Alice confirmed. You went to dinner with them, didn't you? You let him bring his mistress to company dinners while I was at home heating up his roast beef. He's the CEO, Mom. Jason snapped. We have to work with him. What did you want us to do? Quit. Lose everything because you guys couldn't make it work. I wanted you to call me, Alice whispered. I wanted you to be my children. But you aren't my children right now. You're his employees. That's not fair, Kara cried, tears finally welling up. We love you, Mom. That's why we're here. We don't want to see you get crushed in court. Dad will destroy you. He has the best lawyers in the state. Please, Mom, be the bigger person. You always are. Just take the money and let peace return to the family. Be the bigger person. Alice had heard that phrase her entire life. Be the bigger person, Alice. He's just stressed. Be the bigger person, Alice. Let him have the final say. Be the bigger person, Alice, and sign the papers without reading them. She looked at the contract Jason was holding. $500,000. It was a lot of money. It was safe. If she took it, her children would hug her. They would invite her to Thanksgiving again. Scott would win, yes, but she would have her family back. She looked at Jason's anxious face. He wasn't worried about her. He was worried about his inheritance. He was worried that if Alice took $5 million from the family pot, his share would be smaller when Scott died. They were asking her to set herself on fire, so they wouldn't have to deal with the smoke. Alice stood up. No, she said. Jason blinked. What? No, Alice said louder. I am not signing that. Mom, are you crazy? Kara stood up too. You're turning down $500,000? For what? Spite. For justice, Alice said. And for my future. You're going to destroy the family. Jason shouted, his professional mask slipping. If you sue Dad, if you embarrass him like this, he's going to cut us off. Do you want that? Do you want your grandkids to suffer because you're greedy? I'm not the one who is greedy, Jason. Alice said, her voice shaking with a rage she had suppressed for decades. Your father threw me away like trash. You watched him do it. And now that I have something of value, you come here begging me to fix his mistake? No. She looked them both in the eye. I spent 45 years being the bigger person, Alice said, her voice dropping to a cold, hard tone. I shrank myself so your father could feel big. I shrank myself so you two could have everything you wanted. Well, I'm done shrinking. I am done being the bigger person. I am going to destroy him in court. And if you two choose to stand next to him while I do it, that is your choice. Mom, please, Kara sobbed. Don't do this. It's already done, Alice said. Get off my porch. Jason stared at her. He looked like he didn't recognize her. He had never seen his mother say no. He grabbed the contract and shoved it back into his pocket. Fine, Jason spat. Good luck, Mom. You're going to need it. Dad isn't going to stop. Neither am I, Alice said. She watched them walk back to their expensive cars. They didn't look back. They got in, slammed the doors, and drove away. Alice stood alone on the porch. Her heart was breaking. They were her babies. She wanted to run after them. She wanted to fix it. But then she touched her purse, where the deed was safely tucked away. If she folded now, she would be the victim forever. She would be the poor ex-wife who took a handout. She went back inside and picked up the phone. She dialed David Parker. David, Alice said, wiping a tear from her cheek. My children just left. What did they want? David asked gently. They wanted me to settle, Alice said. They wanted me to save the family reputation. And what did you say? I told them I'd see their father in court. Alice said. File the response. David, we are going to trial. She hung up the phone. The silence in the house was different now. It wasn't the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of a battlefield after the first shot has been fired. She had lost her husband. Now, she had likely lost her children. But for the first time in her life, Alice Campbell belonged to herself. Alice just made the hardest choice of her life. She chose her own justice over her children's inheritance and family peace. Do you think she was right to ignore her children's pleas? Or should she have been the bigger person one last time to save her relationship with them? Let me know what you would have done in the comments below. The Charleston County Courthouse was a building designed to intimidate. The marble floors echoed with the sound of hard-soled shoes, and the air was always cold, smelling of old paper and floor wax. Alice sat at the plaintiff's table next to David Parker. She kept her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. She was wearing a new suit today, a soft navy blue that Nadine had insisted she buy on credit. Dress for the job you want, Nadine had said. And the job you want is millionaire landowner. On the other side of the aisle, Scott sat with Mr. Vance. Scott didn't look quite as sharp as he had in his office. His tie was slightly crooked. There were dark circles under his eyes. The news of the lawsuit had leaked, just as his daughter Kara had feared. The local business journals were already running stories about the Campbell land dispute. Scott hated bad press more than he hated losing money. He was tapping his expensive pen against the table, a nervous tick Alice hadn't seen since the recession in 2008. All rise, the bailiff called out. Judge Harriet Miller walked in. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She sat down, opened the file, and looked over the rim of her glasses at the two parties. I've read the motions, Judge Miller said, her voice echoing in the quiet room. Mr. Vance, you are arguing that your client, Mr. Campbell, was defrauded? Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Vance stood up, smoothing his jacket. Mrs. Campbell knowingly misrepresented the value of the asset. She pretended to be destitute. She asked for the land under the guise of needing a place for a trailer. She knew full well that the zoning had changed. That is material fraud. Alice felt a knot in her stomach. Put that way, it sounded bad. It sounded like a lie. Because it was a lie. David Parker stood up slowly. He didn't look worried. Your Honor, my client did not set the price of the land. Mr. Campbell did. For 30 years, he referred to this property as the mud pit. He refused to pay transfer taxes on it because he deemed it worthless. And most importantly, David picked up a piece of paper from his desk. It was the waiver. Most importantly, Mr. Campbell signed this quitclaim deed. I would like to direct the court's attention to paragraph 4. The judge flipped through her copy of the file. I see it. It reads, David continued, his voice clear and loud, Grantor, that's Scott, hereby releases any claim to the property regardless of future valuation, development potential, or zoning changes. He signed it, Your Honor. He is a sophisticated businessman. He had legal counsel present. He simply made a bad deal because he was in a rush to divorce his wife. Scott's face turned a deep, ugly shade of purple. He whispered something furious to Mr. Vance. Judge Miller looked at Scott. Mr. Campbell, did you read the document before you signed it? Scott stood up, ignoring his lawyer's hand on his arm. I signed it because she was begging. She played the victim. I was trying to be generous. Generous? Judge Miller raised an eyebrow. You gave her a piece of land you thought was a swamp in exchange for her walking away from a multi-million-dollar company and 45 years of marriage assets. That doesn't sound generous, Mr. Campbell. That sounds like you thought you were getting a bargain. The courtroom went silent. Scott opened his mouth, then closed it. He sat down hard. The law is clear, Judge Miller said, closing the file. South Carolina upholds separation agreements unless there is evidence of coercion. Mr. Campbell was not coerced. He had a lawyer. He had the resources to check the zoning map himself. He chose not to because he was arrogant. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Alice Campbell. The quitclaim deed is valid. The land belongs to her. Alice let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for weeks. David squeezed her arm. We did it, he whispered. Across the aisle, Scott looked like he had been punched in the gut. He stared at the table, his hands gripping the edge. He had just lost $5 million. But more than that, he had lost to Alice. The wife he called history had just outsmarted him. Alice stood up. She didn't look at him. She walked out of the courtroom, her head high. The hallway outside was crowded. Alice wanted fresh air. She pushed through the heavy double doors and stepped out onto the courthouse steps. The Charleston sun was bright and warm. The street noise, cars, tourists, carriage horses, sounded like music. Alice! The voice came from behind her. She stiffened. She knew that voice. It was the voice that had told her he loved her at the altar. It was the voice that had screamed at her to get out of his house. She turned around. Scott was coming down the steps. He wasn't storming. He wasn't yelling. He was smiling. He hurried over to her, brushing past David Parker, as if the lawyer didn't exist. He stopped right in front of Alice, invading her personal space. He smelled of the expensive musk cologne he had started wearing for the younger woman. Alice, wait, Scott said, slightly breathless. Don't run off. Alice took a step back. It's over, Scott. The judge ruled. I know, Scott said, waving his hand dismissively. Judges, lawyers, it's all just noise, isn't it? Look at us, Alice, standing here arguing like strangers. He reached out and took her hand. His grip was warm, familiar. For 45 years, this was the hand she had held at funerals, at weddings, at the birth of their children. What do you want, Scott? Alice asked, pulling her hand away. Scott sighed, putting on a look of deep, soulful regret. It was a look Alice had seen before, usually right after he had forgotten her birthday or said something cruel to her mother. I made a mistake, ally, he said, using her old nickname. I got caught up. You know how stress gets to me. The business was struggling. I felt old. I had a midlife crisis. It's a cliché, really. I was a fool. Alice stared at him. A fool? Yes, Scott nodded eagerly. That girl, the one at the house, she's gone. I sent her packing this morning. She was nothing, just a distraction. She didn't understand me. Not like you do. He took a step closer, lowering his voice to an intimate whisper. We have history, Alice. 45 years. You can't just throw that away over a bad month. We built that house together. We built that family. The kids, Jason and Kara, are miserable. They want their parents back. Alice watched him. She watched the way the sun glinted off his silver hair. She watched the way his eyes crinkled at the corners, the charm that had made him a successful salesman. He was doing exactly what David had warned her about. He was spinning the web. I was thinking, Scott continued, his voice smooth as silk. We stop this fighting. We rescind the divorce. You move back home. I'll fire the housekeeper. You always cooked better than her anyway. And the land. We develop it together. Campbell and Campbell, like partners. Doesn't that sound better than being alone in some condo? For a split second, time seemed to freeze. Alice looked at her husband. He was offering her everything she had cried for in Chapter 1. He was offering her the house back, the status, the normalcy. He was offering to make the shame go away. All she had to do was say yes, and she could go back to her kitchen, back to her garden, back to being Mrs. Scott Campbell. She wouldn't have to worry about money or lawsuits. She could just be safe. She saw the hope in his eyes. But then she looked closer. It wasn't hope. It was greed. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the woman who just won a $5 million judgment. He didn't want Alice back. He wanted the asset back. He wanted to control the Campbell and Campbell partnership so he could funnel the money back into his own accounts. He thought she was stupid. He thought a few nice words and the promise of her old kitchen would be enough to make her hand over an empire. A bubble of laughter rose in Alice's chest. It started as a small chuckle, but it grew. It bubbled up through her throat, loud and genuine. She laughed. She laughed right in his face. Scott stepped back, looking confused. Alice, why are you laughing? I'm pouring my heart out here. Alice shook her head, wiping a tear of mirth from her eye. Oh, Scott, you aren't pouring your heart out. You're negotiating. I am not, Scott protested, looking offended. I love you, Alice. You don't love me, Alice said, her voice steady and sharp. You threw me out like garbage when you thought I was worthless. And now that I'm worth $5 million, suddenly you remember we have history. It's not about the money, Scott lied. It is entirely about the money, Alice corrected him. And that's okay, because for the first time in my life, I have it, and you don't. She adjusted her purse on her shoulder. She looked at this man who had controlled her, belittled her, and underestimated her for half a century. She felt lighter than air. I don't want to cook your roast beef, Scott. Alice said, I don't want to clean your house. And I certainly don't want to be your partner. But you can't do this alone, Scott sneered, his mask slipping again. You're an old woman, Alice. Who is going to take care of you? Alice smiled. It was the most beautiful smile she had worn in years. I am, she said. She turned to David Parker. Come on, David. We have a celebration lunch to get to. Nadine is waiting. Alice, Scott yelled after her, desperation creeping into his voice. You need me. You're nothing without me. Alice stopped. She turned around one last time. She looked at the man standing on the steps, red-faced and sweating, clutching his empty briefcase. I don't need a husband, Scott, she said, loud enough for the people passing by to hear. I have an empire. She turned back around and walked down the sidewalk. She didn't look back. She heard Scott shouting something else, but his voice faded into the background noise of the city. It was just noise. Irrelevant, angry noise. Alice took a deep breath of the warm air. It tasted like freedom. It tasted like victory. She had walked into that courthouse a victim, and she was walking out a queen. The closing documents for the sale of the Miller Marshlands were signed on a Tuesday morning, 6 months after the trial. It was a quiet affair. There were no screaming matches, no judges, and no Scott. Just Alice, David Parker, and a representative from the tech development firm. When the wire transfer hit Alice's new bank account, an account solely in her name at a different bank than the one Scott used, Alice stared at the receipt. $5,200,000. The teller, a kind young woman named Sarah, smiled at her. "That's a lot of zeros, Mrs. Campbell. Are you planning a vacation?" Alice folded the receipt and placed it in her purse, right next to her old, worn-out wallet. Eventually, Alice said, "But first, I'm going home." But she didn't mean the big, cold house in the suburbs where she had spent 45 years shrinking herself to fit Scott's ego. She meant her new home. 2 weeks after the verdict, Alice had bought a house. It wasn't a mansion. She didn't want a mansion. She wanted something that felt like a hug. She found a restored cottage in Charleston's historic district on Queen Street. It had a wide piazza, a heavy iron gate, and a garden that had been neglected just enough to need her help. It was perfect. Moving in was the first time Alice realized how little she actually owned. Scott had kept the furniture, the art, the rugs. He had kept the stuff. Alice had walked away with her clothes and a box of old papers. At first, the empty rooms of the cottage terrified her. They echoed, but Nadine, who had practically moved into the guest room to help with the transition, handed her a paint deck. "Paint it whatever color you want," Nadine said. "Scott hated blue, right? He said it was depressing. He said it was cold." Alice remembered. "Great." Nadine grinned. "Let's paint the living room robins egg blue." And they did. Alice hired contractors, but she did the finishing touches herself. She spent weeks visiting antique stores on King Street, buying things simply because she liked them. She bought a velvet sofa in a rich, deep emerald green. She bought abstract paintings that Scott would have called messy. She filled the kitchen with copper pots and bright yellow ceramic bowls. For the first time in her life, her environment reflected her soul, not her husband's expectations. One afternoon, about 3 months after she moved in, Alice was kneeling in her garden, planting hydrangeas. The low hum of the city was all around her, the clip-clop of carriage tours, the distant sound of church bells. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She wiped her dirty hands on her jeans, something Scott would have scolded her for, and looked at the screen. It was Jason. Her children had been quiet since the trial. They called occasionally, stiff, awkward conversations about the weather or the grandkids. They were still processing the shift in power. They had bet on their father, and they had lost. "Hello, Jason," Alice answered, sitting back on her heels. "Hey, Mom." Jason sounded subdued. I was just driving by the old house." "Oh," Alice asked. She felt a strange detachment. "How does it look?" "The grass is getting long," Jason admitted. "Dad fired the landscapers. He's trying to cut costs." Alice didn't say anything. She let the silence stretch. "He's moving out next week," Jason said, his voice dropping. "He's listing the house. He can't afford the upkeep anymore, the legal fees from the lawsuit, and the business took a hit, Mom. After the story came out in the paper about him trying to trick you, a lot of the local investors pulled out. They said they couldn't trust his ethics." "I'm sorry to hear that," Alice said. And she meant it in a way. She didn't want Scott to starve. She just didn't want him to win. "He's getting a condo," Jason continued, "over in Mount Pleasant. It's small. 2 bedrooms. No garage. That sounds manageable, Alice said calmly. He's alone, Mom. Jason added, a hint of accusation returning to his voice. That girl, the one he left you for, she took off the minute the stock price dipped. She's in Miami now. I figured she might be. Alice said. She reached out and touched the soft petal of a hydrangea. Jason, why are you telling me this? I don't know. Jason sighed. I guess I thought you'd care. He's your husband. Well, ex-husband. He's pretty depressed. He asks about you. Alice looked up at the blue sky above her garden. She thought about Scott alone in a small apartment, surrounded by boxes of his important business papers, with no one to cook his roast beef and no one to blame for his failures. I hope he finds peace, Jason. Alice said gently, I really do, but I can't give it to him. I gave him 45 years. I'm all out of time to give. She ended the call a few minutes later. She waited for the guilt to hit her. She waited for that old, familiar pang of responsibility, the feeling that she needed to run over there and fix him. But it didn't come. Instead, Nadine walked out onto the piazza, holding 2 glasses of white wine. Who was that? Nadine asked, handing Alice a glass. Jason, Alice said, taking a sip. It was crisp and cold. Updating me on Scott. He's selling the big house. Moving to a rental. Nadine raised her eyebrows. How does that make you feel? Alice thought about it. It feels distant, she said, like hearing about a thunderstorm in another county. It's sad, but I'm not getting wet. Nadine clinked her glass against Alice's. To staying dry. To staying dry, Alice smiled. They sat on the piazza as the sun began to set, painting the Charleston sky in shades of purple and orange. Alice looked at Nadine. Her friend looked younger, too. The stress of the lawsuit was gone, replaced by the excitement of planning their next adventure. So, Nadine said, pulling out a brochure, I was thinking Italy in September. The Amalfi Coast. No tour buses. Just us, a rental car, and a lot of pasta. Book it, Alice said immediately. First class. I love rich Alice. Nadine laughed. But Alice wasn't just spending money on herself. The empire she had claimed in the parking lot wasn't just about buying sofas and plane tickets. A week later, Alice walked into the administrative offices of the local community college. She was wearing her navy suit, but this time she wore a silk scarf that added a pop of color. She looked vibrant. She met with the dean of students, a woman named Dr. Evans. Mrs. Campbell, this is incredibly generous, Dr. Evans said, looking over the check Alice had placed on the desk. The Alice Miller Fresh Start Scholarship. Can you tell me a little more about who you want this to benefit? Women over 50, Alice said firmly. Women who are starting over. Women who have been displaced, divorced, or widowed and need to learn a new skill to survive. I want to pay for their tuition, their books, and their childcare if they have grandchildren they're raising. I want them to know they aren't invisible. You're going to change a lot of lives, Dr. Evans said, her eyes misting up. I just want to give them the chance I almost didn't get, Alice said. If I hadn't found that deed, I don't know where I'd be, probably living in a trailer. Leaving the college, Alice felt a sense of purpose she had never felt as a housewife. She wasn't just existing anymore. She was impacting the world. She was turning her pain into a ladder for other women to climb. That evening, Alice sat on her new porch swing. The night air was filled with the scent of jasmine, the same scent that used to remind her of the night Scott threw her out. Now, it just smelled like Charleston. It smelled like home. She rocked back and forth gently. She thought about the last 9 months, the terror of the hotel room, the humiliation on the doorstep, the cold satisfaction of the trap snapping shut, the heartbreaking moment she said no to her children. It had been a war, but looking at her garden, glowing softly under the landscape lights she had installed herself. Alice knew she had won the only victory that mattered. She hadn't just won the money. She had won herself back. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the cool air. She was 69 years old. She was single. She was wealthy. And for the first time in her life, she was entirely, completely free. Alice chose justice over family peace. Alice whispered to herself, repeating the question that had haunted her. She thought about Scott in his lonely apartment. She thought about her children, who were slowly learning to respect her boundaries. She thought about the women who would go to college next year because of her check. She took another sip of wine and smiled into the darkness. Yes, she said aloud. She certainly did. Alice chose justice over family peace. If your children begged you to let your ex off the hook, would you have listened? Tell me in the comments. What city are you listening from? And what time is it there? Write it in the comments. And if you'd like to help me keep sharing these emotional, thrilling stories every day, even a small donation makes a big difference. It truly helps keep the channel alive. For more life stories like this, you can explore the other videos on my channel and subscribe. On the screen, you'll see 2 new stories I'm sure you'll enjoy. Click one and start listening right away. With love,